The sound of running water beside her ears woke up Chandler Sue, who was sleeping soundly. She opened her sleepy eyes and was shocked by the scene in front of her. It was a deluxe room. The morning sun was shining on the messy sheets. The clothes and shoes of a man and a woman were scattered on the carpet. The room was filled with the smell of lovemaking. As she looked down at her naked body under the blanket, she felt discomfort down there. Chandler grabbed her long hair hard. The scattered memory of last night came alive like slides. Her boyfriend, who had been in love with her for 3 years, said that she was not gentle, considerate, and had no charm. He then went abroad to study for a doctor's degree with a girl from a rich family. Chandler, who looked tough on the outside and was in fact vulnerable on the inside, was drunk as a fiddler last night. Impulsively, she grabbed a man randomly at the bar and took him to the room. At this moment, Chandler was sitting on the bed, her legs trembling. She had always respected and loved herself. How on earth could she do something that she wouldn't even dare to think of doing normally? It seemed that it was an absolute truth that alcohol does make a cowardly man strong. She put on her clothes in a panic, grabbed her bag, and wanted to sneak out without being noticed. She didn't expect the bathroom door to open with a loud bang. Chandler instinctively turned around and saw a super handsome man walking out of the bathroom. He had thick hair, a firm face, distinctive facial features, a fit body figure, and behind that loose robe was his half-hidden sexy and strong chest muscles. This man was a knockout. It was by far much better than her ex-boyfriend. Chandler instantly felt a sense of satisfaction in her heart. She would rather give her virginity to this stranger than to that unfaithful man. Thinking back on everything that had happened last night, Chandler's face blushed immediately. Last night, he was at times gentle and at times rough. At the age of 25, she tasted the feeling of being a woman for the first time. Of course, right now standing in front of him, Chandler was ashamed. But she still pretended to be calm. In contrast to Chandler, who was at a loss, he appeared to be very natural. He looked at her from her head to toe with his deep eyes. He curled his lips and showed a disdainful expression, which made Chandler very uncomfortable. Then, he suddenly walked to the bedside and reached out to pick up his Gucci wallet. Chandler understood immediately as she saw a stack of cash in his wallet. Did he take her as that kind of woman and wants to pay her for last night? No, she couldn't be insulted like this by a man. Chandler immediately took out the only remaining $150 from her bag and threw it on the wrinkled sheets in front of him. He raised his eyebrows and stared at her in confusion. Chandler pretended to be calm and held her hands in front of her chest. She looked up at him and said in a critical tone, "Although you are good-looking, you are outwardly strong and inwardly weak, and you are poor of skills. So you only worth this much. What did you say?" Obviously, Chandler's words had irritated him. She saw that he was frowning and he put on a long face. In order to pretend to be more real, Chandler stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder. She said in an earnest tone, "I suggest that you offer some discount first and accumulate some experience. When your skills get better, you can charge more naturally. Women nowadays are not easy to serve." "You are asking for trouble," he frowned and uttered a few words through his teeth. Chandler saw that his hands were clenched into fists. She didn't want to practice with him. She chose to escape quickly from the scene before things got out of control. When she walked out of the Hilton Hotel, his stiff, long face was still in her head. Chandler felt her fast heartbeat on her chest and felt lucky that she had run fast enough. After grabbing some breakfast casually, Chandler rushed to the company. On her way, she suddenly received a call from Mrs. Sue. "Chandler, I met your elder aunt today and she said that your grandpa is seriously ill. Why don't you go to the nursing home to pay him a visit? After all, I am not a member of the Sue family anymore. It is not appropriate for me to go." Mrs. Sue knew that her older daughter is stubborn. so she tried to say it in a discussion tone. I don't want to go. Grandpa is a retired cadre and his pension is very high. Whenever her dissipated father and his mistress saw her visiting her grandfather, they would beat her and scold her, saying that she was after Grandpa's money. Your grandfather treated you very well before he got sick. After all, he is almost 90 years old. He doesn't have too much time left. Just go there for once. Mrs. Sue tried to persuade her earnestly. Before Grandpa fell ill, he had treated the two sisters very well. So Chandler had to do it reluctantly. I'll go at night, Chandler said after thinking for a while. Then remember, if you run into your father, don't talk too much. Mrs. Sue said eagerly, if he doesn't mess with me, I won't mess with him either. Chandler then hung up the phone. Back then, her mother knelt on the ground and begged her father, saying, as long as he does not divorce and provide her and their child home, she could turn a blind eye to his affair with that woman. However, her jerk-off father was still not satisfied. Not only did he divorce her, but he also took away all the money. Only the mother and her two daughters knew what kind of hardships they had been through over these years. As soon as Chandler sat on the chair, her colleague and best friend, Lisa Chow, came over and looked at Chandler. Didn't you just break off? Why your cheeks look so rosy? I spent $150 on a toy boy last night to soothe my broken heart, Chandler said, and laughed in a self-mockingly way. You can't get good ones at a cheap price. Lisa curled her lips. No matter what they were talking about, their minds were still extremely innocent. Thus, Lisa thought that Chandler was talking nonsense. By the way, here is the breaking news. A big boss was assigned to us Brilliance Group from the headquarters, Lisa suddenly said. Chandler shook her head indifferently. I am a little assistant. It doesn't matter who is the big boss. I heard that the new president is the golden boy from the headquarters. His father is a high official in the province, and his mother is the chairman of the headquarters. He is young and handsome, and all the women in the Brilliance Group are dying to see his face. Lisa's mouth was dripping with saliva. This kind of man is too high for us to reach. Chandler rolled her eyes at her. At this time, Manager Casso, Chandler's direct supervisor, came over and said to her with a serious look, the new president has been on board. All the personnel above the manager's assistant level will need to go to the conference room for a meeting. Chandler quickly took a notebook and a pen and followed behind Matthew Sow. Lisa winked at her. Chandler knew that she wanted her to take a close-up picture of the big boss. There was a crowd of people sitting in the conference room, and Chandler, as a small assistant, could only squeeze in the corner. In fact, she wasn't interested in how handsome the big boss was at all. Instead, she was thinking of the well-defined face she met this morning. Thinking of his gnashing face, Chandler could not help but cover her mouth and giggle. She felt guilty more or less for her vicious words, but in the end, he also took advantage of her. Besides, he also got paid. Guys would dream about things like that to happen to them. With a burst of applause, Chandler looked up and saw a handsome man in a black suit walking into the conference room while surrounded by the crowd. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Michael Guan, the new president of the Brilliance Group. Chandler stared at that well-defined face for a good long time, so shocked that she could not close her mouth. After confirming repeatedly, she then pulled her mind back to reality. Last night, the toy boy on whom she spent $150 turned out to be the new boss from the headquarters. Oh my God! She was desperately looking for a place to hide. What a damn coincidence! Who would have known that the person one grabbed randomly turned out to be a president? Are the presidents on sale now so that everyone can have a president outside? Chandler told herself to be calm, but her legs were still shaking. She could only lower her head and hide half of her face behind her long hair, hoping that Michael, who was sitting in the host's seat, would not notice her. After all, There were dozens of people sitting in the conference room, and those nympho women assistants and managers were all indulging in the president's speech. He should not pay any notice to an ordinary woman like her, right? Finally, she made it to the end of the meeting. Chandler sneaked out of the conference room in the crowd. The first thing Chandler did when she returned to the office was to get hold of Lisa and to complain. Lisa looked at her in shock. "You are one lucky woman. You slept with the president just like that. Don't joke around. I am afraid that he will retaliate against me and fire me. I still need to provide for my mother and sister." Chandler freaked out. She regretted it badly in her heart. Why on earth did she throw $150 to him? She even satirized him for his bad skills. "The karma came too fast," Lisa shrugged. "Don't worry too much. Maybe he didn't notice you at all." Before she even finished her sentence, the manager Matthew's voice came. "Chandler, President Guan wants you in his office." Upon hearing this, Chandler really wanted to burst into tears. Except she had no tears. She has no options. Even though she knew there might be serious consequences, she still had to go. Chandler stepped into the president's office with an uneasy mood. Michael sat in front of his desk, looking at the document with his head down, as if he did not notice her arrival. Looking at his thick hair, Chandler took a deep breath and said in a flattering voice, "President Guan, are you looking for me?" As soon as Michael looked up, Chandler quickly responded with a standard smile. Although she felt very disdainful in her heart, she still dared not to offend the big boss. His eyes were sharp and cold. He looked at Chandler from her head to her toe, as if he had seen through her clothes. This reminded her of last night's nude intimacy. Chandler's face immediately burned with a blush. Chandler hated his eyes in particular, but after all, she had to keep this job so she could only tolerate it for the time being. However, she thought in her heart, "So what? Let's see how she will treat you when she becomes rich in the future." However, the chance of Chandler getting rich is even slimmer than being struck by lightning. He put down the pen in his hand, leaning back on the wide leather chair. He then crossed his hands and sneered. "I didn't expect the private life of the female employees of the Brilliance Group to be so enriched. This is really beyond my expectation. President Guan, your private life is also very enriched." Chandler could not help adding to that. "We are about the same kind of people. I am a slut. You are no better than me." Michael's face immediately got stiff and his lips twitched. He was speechless for a moment. Chandler quickly lowered her head. Although she was very happy in her heart, she regretted being so quick-tongued. After all, she still wanted to continue her career in the Brilliance Group. For a moment, the office was quiet that Chandler could almost hear their breathing. What on earth does he want? Chandler glanced at the guest sofa next to her, and immediately she thought of something bad. He must think that I am a very promiscuous woman. Could it be that he wanted to harass her in the office? Chandler's heart trembled, and she thought, she won't give in to his power. The next moment, Chandler raised her head and realized that she was overthinking. Michael took out $150 from his wallet and placed it in front of her. He said with a serious face, "Miss Sue, I think I need to clarify to you that I don't have any other part-time job other than being the president of the Brilliance Group, so please take back these $150. Chandler could not help feeling a bit funny. Why did he fuss over such a tiny thing? Doesn't he just want to claim that he is not a toy boy? I understand what you mean, President Guan. Chandler said it with a smile. It turned out that the big boss called her to here just to declare that he does not have a special career. She would accept the request in a heartbeat. However, Michael's next gesture confused Chandler, as Chandler just reached out to take back that $150. He then unexpectedly threw another banknote on top of that. She looked at him confusedly and did not understand what he meant. President Guan, these $100 is your reward for last night. Michael's eyes were full of superiority. Damn it. Chandler really wanted to swear at this moment. He meant that she was a prostitute, who was even $50 cheaper than a toy boy with bad skills. She was only worth $100, which meant she was humiliated for being cheap, if it wasn't for the fact that the whole family were dependent on her financially. Chandler would have slapped him directly and told him that she was not someone to mess with. However, she had to lower her head under his roof. Chandler, filled with anger in her chest, told herself to calm down and to stay calm. At this moment, Michael happened to stare at her with playful eyes. He wanted to see that he just took the upper hand. She would not let him succeed. After turning his eyes, Chandler went forward and picked up the $250. She held the notes in the air with her fingers and said to President Guan with a bright smile, "President Guan, a jerk." Michael's face immediately pulled down as Chandler had wished. Before he could respond, she said, "If there is nothing else, I'll go back to work." After running out of the president's office, Chandler shrugged her shoulders complacently. When she was in college, she was the best debate in the school's debates. If you want to argue with Chandler, you will have a long way to practice. What does he want from you? As soon as Chandler returned to the office, Lisa pulled her over and asked her in a low voice. Chandler rolled her eyes. Just to clarify that he is not a toy boy. And then? Lisa wanted to dig out some other exclusive news. There is nothing more. Chandler shrugged. So boring. Lisa completely lost her curiosity. You look quite disappointed. Chandler did not understand what Lisa was thinking. There was some naughtiness in Lisa's smile. I thought he wanted to get more from you. Chandler immediately curled her lips and said, I still want to live a few more years. The big boss is a knockout who can prolong a woman's life, just like a tonic. Lisa lowered her head and looked at the photo of Michael on her mobile phone. In just a few hours, Michael's photo had been spread all over the mobile phones of all female employees of the Brilliance Group. Good guys always end up with some old witches. I am young and beautiful, forget it. Chandler shook her head with a smile. Hey, what did he taste like? Lisa approached her with a smile. Chandler raised her eyebrows and grinned. It is sour. You can have a try if you don't believe me. I wish I could taste it. Lisa rolled her eyes and returned to her seat. Chandler did taste him, but she was so drunk that she forgot what he really tasted like. No matter how good he tasted, he is still a jerk, and an unromantic, cold-faced jerk. Chandler shook her head. He wasn't her cup of tea. As soon as she finished working in the afternoon, Chandler went straight to the nursing home in the suburbs. By the time she arrived at the nursing home, it had already got dark outside. When her grandfather was young, he was a soldier and had served in the National Army, so he was able to enjoy the treatment of a veteran cadre. As a result, he had been able to live in a nursing home. Grandfather was nearly 90 years old and had been bedridden for more than 10 years. So Chandler didn't have a deep relationship with him. She came here only for peace of mind. As soon as she entered the ward, Chandler saw her elder uncle and elder aunt sobbing in front of her grandfather, who was lying on the bed. Chandler is here. The elder aunt saw Chandler first. She got up and came over. How is Grandpa? Chandler looked at the skinny old man on the bed and felt very upset. He has already been issued a critical condition notice. He will be gone in 1 or 2 days. The elder uncle answered sadly. Upon hearing this, Chandler's eyes turned red, and when she tried to comfort by saying, Uncle, you've been taking care of Grandpa all these years. You've tried your best. The elder uncle was just about to say something. At this time, there was a noise outside the door. Later, Chandler's unfaithful dad, the mistress, and his stepdaughter walked in. Liz Who was the name of the mistress, and people called her Fox, except right now she is an old fox. Her neckline was extremely low, and she wore so much makeup on her face that powder couldn't stop falling, and even that could not conceal the wrinkles on her face. The stepdaughter Penny Who had big eyes, a tall nose bridge, a long face, big breasts, slender waist, voluptuous butt. Chandler suspected that each inch of her body had been reconstructed. Besides, she had heavy makeup on, and no one had ever seen her true face. As soon as Liz came in, she cried out, "Oh, old father, how can you just decide to go like this? At least leave us a message and tell us about your will to avoid the misunderstanding between the two brothers?" As soon as she came, the quiet ward was in a messy chaos. Chandler frowned. Obviously, they had been indifferent to Grandpa's illness for so many years. Now they were only here to come after his assets. At the last moment of Dad's life, can't you just let him go quietly? The elder uncle's voice was full of anger. At this moment, Liz stopped crying immediately and said fiercely, "Big brother, the old man is dying. Don't you think we should sort out Dad's house and the funeral money offered by the country now? Dad is not dead yet. Besides, the funeral fee will only be paid by the country when the person is dead." The elder uncle was an honest person. In terms of pestering, he was no match for Johnson, Sue, and Liz. At this time, Chandler's unfaithful father said, "Big brother, you can't take all the money to yourself. After all, Dad has 2 sons. You." Elder uncle was so angry that his face turned pale as he pointed at Johnson. The elder aunt quickly came forward to get hold of him and asked worriedly, "Are you having a heart attack?" "That is right. The second son's family is also entitled to inherit part of Grandpa's money." Penny, the stepdaughter, also added. For a moment, the honest couple of elder uncle and aunt were no match for them. Chandler's heart was filled with indignation. She could no longer tolerate their vicious and nasty faces. She reached out and argued with them. "How dare you to come after Grandpa's property? Where were you when he was sick? They were not blood related, but you are Grandpa's son. When he was sick, you didn't even pay him any visit. Has your conscience been eaten by a dog?" Johnson did not answer, because he knew he was wrong. Liz was adding oil to the fire. "Chandler, he is your father. You would have been beaten to death in ancient times for scolding your own father like this." Chandler was furious when she saw Liz. Back then, she pointed at her mother's nose and scolded her. She regretted that she was young at that time, or otherwise, she would definitely fight with her till the end. Chandler raised her chin and sneered. "In ancient times, a mistress like you would have already been drowned as a punishment." Liz was enraged by Chandler's words. She turned to Johnson and said, "Johnson, who is the parent here?" Johnson said furiously, "Chandler, apologize to your aunt immediately." "Am I wrong? Isn't she a mistress?" She sprang to her feet and pointed at Liz. For so many years, her father had refused to give her and her sister any child support. Chandler remembered that when she was a child, she could not pay the tuition fee, and she asked him for money. Not only did he refuse to pay, but he also slapped her. However, he raised his mistress's daughter with extreme care and protection. From then on, Chandler secretly promised to herself that she would never take even a penny from him. She removed her father out of her life ever since. "Johnson, I don't want to live anymore, since I am insulted by your daughter like this." Liz began to cry and howl. "I'll beat you to death." Johnson was furious and slapped Chandler all of a sudden. Chandler was hit so hard that she saw stars and staggered. Penny took the opportunity to push her in the back and made her fall on the hard floor heavily. Chandler was sweating from the pain. She hurriedly got up and shouted repeatedly, "I am not done with you." Chandler went up and gave Penny a hard slap on her face. Penny was caught unprepared. Upon seeing this, Johnson stepped forward and was about to continue to beat Chandler. Beastard, let's see how I will take care of you. At this time, the elder uncle and aunt were afraid that Chandler would get hurt, so they quickly stepped up to separate them from each other with their bodies. Johnson, don't be violent, the elder uncle shouted angrily. Johnson, beat this bastard to death. It was Liz's voice. Chandler touched the corner of her mouth and looked down. Her hands were covered with blood, but she felt pleasure in her heart. In the chaos, Chandler saw two people standing at the door with a glance. The one in the front was staring at her with dark eyes, and the one behind him was holding a bunch of flowers in his hand. Chandler's head exploded when she saw him here out of blue, and especially when she was this embarrassed. At this time, the person who was holding the flowers said to the group of people who were in a physical fighting, "Excuse me, does Grandpa Sue live in this ward?" The next moment, these people, including the elder uncle, immediately looked at the people standing at the door. The elder uncle was the first to respond. He quickly stepped forward and said with a smile, "Oh, it is you, President Guan. Please come in, come in. President Guan is here to visit Grandpa Sue. Here is some money. Please buy some nourishment for him." After saying that, Ford Lin handed over the flowers and a thick envelope to the elder aunt. At this time, when everyone was looking at Michael, he was also looking at the people in the ward one by one, including Chandler, who was incredibly embarrassed at the moment. Chandler had never dreamed that someone with such social status, Michael, would come to visit her grandfather. Her family had been ordinary people for the last 8 generations, and they were not even remotely related to people with power and wealth. When everyone was confused, the elder uncle quickly explained to the people, including the elder aunt, "This is the son of my old comrade in arms. He is now the president of Brilliance Group in Zhangzhou City. City. A while ago when my father was seriously ill, I asked him to invite the best expert to treat my father's illness." Upon hearing this, the elder aunt immediately welcomed him warmly. Even Johnson and Liz had changed their ferocious looks and began to approach Michael. However, Michael put on a cold face the time, and he was just enthusiastic to the elder uncle and the elder aunt. Liz was a person who knew how to grab her opportunity. After a while, she pushed Penny over and said in a flattering voice, "Penny, President Guan is managing a very big enterprise. He may have business with us in the future. You can communicate with him more." Her dissipated dad had opened a small insurance agency company. It was said that Liz and her daughter were good at doing business with male clients. Each time, they were able to break one family, Liz and Penny. Chandler suspected that the names of the mother and daughter must have been given by the same person who boldly predicted their lives. One was a homewrecker, and one who sleeps with anyone. "My name is Penny Hu. Please take care of me in the future." Penny put on a very coquettish voice. "I wouldn't be qualified." Although there was no expression on Michael's face, he still tried to be polite. Penny continued with a smile, "President Guan, is it convenient to add you to WeChat? I never add business partners on my WeChat. You can add my secretary for business." Michael looked up and said, Penny didn't seem to give up after being politely turned down. She wanted to continue to say something. Chandler didn't even bother to listen to the disgusting words, so she said to her elder uncle and aunt, "Elder uncle, elder aunt, I am going back first. Be careful on your way," elder uncle and elder aunt said. Chandler nodded, and then looked up. Her eyes and the eyes of Michael met in the air, and she quickly left the ward. The night breeze in spring was still a little cold. Chandler, who was in thin clothes, was not able to find a taxi after walking for a long time. Her hot face was blown by the cold wind. Strong as she was, she couldn't help but weep. However, she didn't regret teaching that homewrecker a lesson, even if she was slapped in the face. When her feet were in pain from the high heels, a black Bentley suddenly stopped in front of her. Chandler looked up, and a well-defined face popped out of the window. Upon seeing that face, Chandler bit her lips because the owner of that face was Michael. "Get in the car," Michael ordered. Chandler hated his tone of speech. It was not working hours, so she did not have to listen to him. "It is hard to get a car here." Seeing that Chandler did not move, Michael frowned slightly. Chandler immediately refused. "President Guan, you are an important person, and you are so busy. I'd better not waste your time." After that, she turned around and left. Michael looked at Chandler's back and deliberately shouted, "I heard that there had been several rape and murder cases in this block recently. The murderer has not been caught yet. The police suspected that the murderer is the resident living nearby." Chandler looked up at the gloomy surroundings. The sound of the wind blowing the leaves was so frightening, and she suddenly felt a chill on her back. The next moment, Chandler suddenly turned around and opened the car door. She quickly got on the passenger seat and fastened the seatbelt, seeing a series of her movements. The corner of Michael's mouth curled into a faint smile. He stepped on the gas pedal and the car drove onto the road. It was quite inside the car. Chandler touched her burning cheek and felt really shameful for what had happened just now. "Sorry to let you watch such a ridiculous drama." "No worries. I have no interests to see others' embarrassing looks." Michael looked straight ahead with no expression. He meant that she was trying to judge his mind with her own vile one. Chandler really wanted to reach out and pat his stiff face to see if there was any elasticity, or how come he would look like this every day. Since she shared nothing in common with Michael, she wouldn't bother to talk with him. She turned to look at the night view outside the window and said nothing more. Over 10 minutes later, the car stopped in front of Chandler's neighborhood. "Thank you, President Guan." Chandler unbuckled her seatbelt and thanked him. After all, he gave her a ride to her door. Michael glanced at the community outside and said, "You don't have to thank me. After all, you are an employee of the Brilliance Group. If anything happens to you, the company will have to pay part of the funeral fee." These words made Chandler angry immediately. What kind of boss curses the employees to death? "Don't worry, President Guan. I will definitely live a long life. You'd better keep the money for yourself." After that, Chandler got out of the car and slammed the door shut. Whoosh! The next moment, the car rushed out quickly. Pooh! There is no decent language in the dog's mouth. Chandler spat at the direction in which the car had left. As soon as she got home, her sister Zoe Sue noticed Chandler's red and swollen face. "Sister, what happened to your face?" Mrs. Sue immediately came over when she heard this. When she saw Chandler's face, she asked eagerly, "Who hit you? Was it your father?" "Mom, I also slapped Penny in her face. I didn't lose." Seeing her mother's distressed look, Chandler pretended to be relaxed. Mrs. Sue said, while soothing Chandler's face with an ice bag, "Chandler, don't stress over it. Your father must have listened to Liz's provocation." Chandler threw the ice bag angrily and shouted, "Mom Johnson hasn't cared about you for so many years. Why do you defend him? You have nothing to do with him now. You are just strangers, and you are worse than strangers. Furthermore, you are enemies." Her mother was just like that. She had a weak character and she didn't have opinions of her own. Her father was her god. They had been divorced for so many years, yet in her heart, Johnson was still her husband. This was what Chandler hated most. He is your father after all. Mrs. Sue's voice was very low. Seeing her obedient mother, Chandler felt sad again and softened her tone. "Mom, I am tired. I am going back to my room to rest." She went into her room irritably with a burning pain on her face. Fortunately, tomorrow is the weekend, or otherwise she would not be able to go to work. Thump, thump. A few minutes later, after the door was knocked twice, Mrs. Sue's voice came in. "Chandler, I forgot to tell you that my good friend has recommended a university professor to you. It is not convenient for you to show your face. I'll help you to make an appointment next week. Upon hearing this, Chandler was so annoyed that she threw herself onto the bed. Since her ex-boyfriend dumped her, her mother had been looking everywhere for people to find her a boyfriend. Once she objected, her mother would cry and force her to meet those people. A week later, in one evening, Chandler sat in a very romantic Western restaurant and waited for the person of her blind date. The matchmaker said that the guy was young and handsome, and he was a university professor. Chandler really did not have a good impression of phony professors. At 7 o'clock sharp, a man in gray trousers, a white shirt, and gold-rimmed glasses sat in front of Chandler. "Hello. My name is Howard Jung. I am 29 years old. I am from here. Now I am a professor at Southern University." The opening speech was simple and clear. Chandler checked him out a bit, and then she raised her chin and said, "I have a few questions for you." The person in front of her was gentle and elegant, exuding the temperament of a well-educated phony professor. He should not be a phony professor. Chandler didn't really want to provoke him, but if she did not provoke him, she would not be able to escape. "I'll tell you everything I know." Howard smiled, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. "Do you have an apartment with 3 bedrooms, 1 dining room, and 1 living room?" Chandler glanced at him. Although Zhangzhou City was not a capital city, it was more prosperous than the capital city. The housing price was also high. If a young man wanted to own a house with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room, 1 dining room, which was more than 100 square meters, he must be either from a rich family or really outstanding. This question made Howard smile. "I live in a duplex suite of 200 square meters now." Chandler was stunned and thought, the whole family must have scraped together a down payment for this duplex, and it must be in some suburban area in the middle of nowhere. She immediately asked, "Do you own an Audi A6? Howard's smile deepened. "I am driving a Land Rover now. If you like Audi, I can change it in the future." Chandler seemed to be choked by a steamed bun. She opened her mouth and couldn't say anything for a while. On the contrary, Howard stared at her with playful eyes. Chandler then made up her mind and said, "I am not a virgin." She stared at him and thought, "I don't believe that you don't care at all." Howard looked out of the window and smiled. "I don't care if you are not a virgin." Chandler's anger was ignited at once. She slammed the table and said, "Are you crazy? You have a big house and a luxury car. You are handsome and unrestrained. You are a university professor. Why do you want to choose someone like me? What part of you is not good?" Howard looked deeply at Chandler. "My father ran away with his mistress when I was a child. I grew up in a single-parent family, and now my mother and sister are all depending on me. My ex-boyfriend said that I was not gentle and I was not attractive, so he went abroad with a rich girl. Chandler said all of these in one time and did not know what to say afterward. "Is there anything else?" Howard looked at her and smiled. Chandler lowered her head and drank the juice. She had already exposed all her shortcomings. Why didn't the guy leave? "You are the most special girl I have ever seen. In fact, I also hate blind dates, but I don't oppose to making friends. Would you disagree if we start with ordinary friends?" In the end, Howard handed Chandler a business card. Chandler took the business card and ate a free meal treated by Howard. Surprisingly, the two of them talked happily. She didn't mind having more friends and she didn't dislike him. Howard insisted on giving Chandler a ride home. Chandler could not turn down, so she stood at the door of the restaurant and waited for him to go to the parking lot to get the car. "Chandler?" Someone suddenly called her from behind. Chandler turned around and saw her direct superior. "Matthew, Manager Kao. Are you also here for dinner?" Chandler was a little surprised. "I am here to accompany President Guan to have dinner with his important customer," Matthew said with a smile. At this moment, Chandler saw Michael and a male businessman walked out of the restaurant. Michael glanced at Chandler coldly, and then turned to talk to the man as if he didn't see her. Seeing Michael, Chandler cursed in her heart. How on earth did I run into someone I didn't want to see when I just came out for dinner? Michael seems to be everywhere. Come to dinner with your friends? Matthew suddenly asked. Coincidentally, Howard drove over. Chandler hurriedly said, "My friend is here." Matthew looked up at Howard, who was sitting in the car, and asked, "Boyfriend?" "No, just ordinary friends." Chandler hurriedly denied. "Chandler, why are you blushing? You are not like this normally." Matthew looked at Chandler playfully. Chandler looked up and accidentally met Michael's eyes. She quickly lowered her eyelids and said, "Manager Cow, goodbye." Chandler quickly sat on the passenger seat, looked through the glass at Michael's for the last time, and the car turned and drove away. Usually, she was straightforward and didn't hesitate at all. What is wrong with her today? Chandler asked herself in her heart. Early the next morning, as soon as Chandler entered the office, Matthew came to her with a serious face. Several days ago, the finance department made a serious mistake in making our budget for the development project. President Guan asked us to go there. How serious is it? Chandler asked nervously. The budget of this project was completed after half a month's overtime, working by the whole finance department. She was fully responsible to keep an eye on it. I have no idea. We'll find out when we get there. Matthew was also very nervous. As soon as Matthew and Chandler walked into Michael's office, he was very angry and threw the 2-inch thick project file on his desk. What have you done? I can't believe there are some low-level parametric mistakes in the budget. Do you know how important this project is to the Brilliance Group? Parametric mistake. The parameters were all under the charge of Lisa. Her mother is seriously ill these days, and she has been so busy that she must have been negligent. How could there be a mistake in the parameters? Matthew asked in surprise. Find out who is responsible for the parameters this time. It has caused so much damage to the company. This must be severely punished. Michael was so angry that he unbuttoned his collar. I am going to check it out now, Matthew said, just now. Chandler quickly said, President Guan, I don't think right now it is the time to find who is to be blamed, but to find a way to solve the budget case. Right now, Lisa's mother is still in hospital, and she has a huge expense. Lisa is still depending on the salary. Solve. How? Michael's voice was aggressive, as if he had swallowed gunpowder. Matthew lowered his head and explained to Chandler. There will be a bidding next Monday. We don't have time to redo the budget. Chandler lowered her head and thought for a moment. Then, she resolutely raised her head and said, There are still 6 days to go before next Monday. I'll be responsible for redoing the budget. Michael stared at Chandler in surprise. Matthew frowned and said, Chandler, there are several major cases in the finance department recently. I can't transfer anyone to help you. I know. I am sure I can complete the budget before next Monday. Chandler said firmly, Lisa can't lose this job. Chandler knew that it would take a lot of time to redo the budget, but she still wanted to try her best. Michael's face was full of contempt. Do you think you can complete the budget on your own within just 6 days? Do you think you are faster than a computer? Isn't the computer also made by manpower? Chandler muttered. This sentence immediately made the office quiet down. Michael stared at her coldly, and she immediately lowered her head. She hated that she could never control her speech. A few seconds later, Michael said to Chandler seriously, Okay, if you can't complete the budget next Monday, you will be fired immediately. Matthew looked at Chandler nervously, but Chandler did not change her expression. She reached out to pick up the budget and said, Understood. After that, she walked out of the president's office, leaving Michael and Matthew all surprised. Anyway, she didn't leave any good impression in front of Michael. It was impossible for her to get a promotion and get a raise in the future. It was better to keep Lisa here. If she failed to finish this task, she would go somewhere else to try her luck. Chandler went home to pack up some simple baggage and prepared to spend her next 6 days in the company. 2 days later, at lunch break, Chandler suddenly received a call from Howard. "Howard, I am busy now. I don't have time to chat with you." Chandler was a little annoyed. The budget work was far more complicated than she had imagined. "I know you are busy and dare not disturb you. I've been on a business trip for a few days and brought you a small gift. Why don't you do me a favor to come down and take it?" Howard said cautiously. After the last time, Chandler and he became friends on Facebook. The two had a great time chatting. They shared a lot of the same languages, so they had been kept in touch. Upon hearing this, Chandler was moved. He still remembered her, even when he was traveling for business. Chandler looked at her watch and thought, anyway, this short period of time won't hurt. So she turned to the phone and said, "Wait a minute, I'll go down now." As soon as she got out of the building, Chandler saw Howard holding a small box with a pink ribbon on it, smiling at her. "Although work is important, your health is more important. Don't be too tired." Howard looked at the haggard Chandler and said, "I got it." Chandler's eyes were sore for a moment. She had been staying in the company for several days. No one cared about her so much. "It is for you." Howard put the small box in Chandler's hand, looking shy. Obviously, he was not a veteran in relationships. Chandler turned her head and looked at a few rows of benches for resting not far away. She pointed at them and said with a smile, "It is still a few minutes before we start to work. Why don't you chat with me for a bit?" "Sure." Howard was overjoyed. "You must be very tired from the business trip, aren't you?" Chandler couldn't find any topics. She felt that it was a bit heartless to send him away as soon as he arrived. "Not at all. I just went to give a lecture and enjoyed the scenery, by the way." Howard smiled a little bit cautiously. While they were talking, Chandler looked up and suddenly saw a figure in a black suit standing not far away. The man looked cool with both of his hands in his pocket. He sneered when he saw Chandler's eyes. Then, he turned around and left. Chandler could not help but curse in her heart. Damn it, he always comes and goes like a ghost every day. I can't believe I got caught by him even for these few minutes outside. "Do you know that person?" Howard followed Chandler's gaze and saw Michael. "I know him, even if he is reduced to ashes," Chandler replied through gritted teeth. "Who is he?" Howard asked curiously. "A capitalist who exploits me," Chandler replied. "Your boss?" Howard raised his eyebrows. Chandler nodded and looked down at her watch. Then she got up and said, "I have to go back and let the capitalist continue to exploit me." After walking a few steps, she suddenly turned to Howard and said with a bright smile, "Thank you for your seafood." Howard looked at Chandler's back and smiled brightly. At this time, the elevator was very busy. Chandler stood among a lot of people and waited for the elevator. Suddenly, she heard a familiar male voice. "No wonder people make mistakes at work. Do all the female employees in the finance department take all the chances they have to date men, just like you do?" Chandler looked up and saw Michael standing in front of her. Chandler, who just got dissed by him, felt blushed and also angry. She said coldly, "President Guan, I only represent myself. Please don't judge all the other people by me." Michael glanced at Chandler's face coldly and sneered. "I think you don't have to waste your energy. You can't finish the budget before Monday." His arrogance and disdain angered Chandler, and her chest was filled with anger. Then, she raised her chin and said to Michael, "Don't worry, President Guan. I will definitely finish it before Monday." After that, she walked towards the safety exit on her high heels. She would rather climb up the stairs than take an elevator with the evil capitalist. Michael's sarcasm provoked Chandler to work hard with all her strength. From that day on, she had never left the office. When she was hungry, she would eat biscuits and instant noodles. When she was sleepy, she would lie down and sleep for an hour. After a few days, she became unkempt and she had dark circles around her eyes. This morning, as soon as Lisa entered the office, she rushed over and said, "Chandler, what was President Guan doing here just now?" Chandler raised her head in bewilderment. "The capitalist, he wasn't here. I saw him get out of here when I just came in." Lisa pointed to the door. At this moment, Chandler suddenly realized that Michael must have come to see her making a fool of herself. He thought that she would not be able to complete the budget before Monday. Chandler rolled up her sleeves. This time, she must impress him. "I know. The capital is here to peek on you. Does he have a crush on you?" Lisa joked. Now the capitalist had become the nickname of Michael. Chandler glanced at her. "He came to see me make a fool of myself." Seeing the dark circles around Chandler's eyes, Lisa said guiltily, "Chandler, I am sorry. I got you in trouble. You have been so tired for the past few days that you even have dark circles around your eyes, and I was not able to give you any help." Chandler raised her head and looked at Lisa, who felt guilty, and deliberately said with ease, "You are not any better. You can't count on that brother of yours. Your mom relies on you now completely. Well, go to work quickly. You have to go to the hospital after work." "Thank you," Lisa said gratefully, and returned to her seat helplessly. Chandler lowered her head and continued to work. Every minute and every second became very important to her. On Sunday evening, when all of her colleagues finished working and left, Chandler was still striving in front of the computer. All of a sudden, there was a steady sound of footsteps in the empty office. Chandler's hair on the back of her neck all stood at once, and she suddenly raised her head. Michael, who was always dressed in a black suit, appeared in front of her. He was so rich that it was hard for Chandler to believe that this was the only suit he had. Michael took a close look at Chandler's haggard face and then asked with a serious expression, "There are only more than 10 hours left until the bidding, which will take place at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Are you sure you can complete it?" Although Michael's expression was very strict this time, there was no disdain or contempt. Chandler looked at the work next to her and answered with certainty, "I am sure it will be done at 5 or 6 o'clock tomorrow morning." Michael nodded. "Then I'll rest in the company tonight. Give me your budget directly after you have finished." Before Chandler could speak, he had already turned around and left. Chandler did not sleep for the whole night, and finally she completed the budget case at 6:30 a.m. She held the 2-inch thick budget case file in her arms and walked briskly to Michael's office. The door of the president's office was unlocked. Chandler looked inside the room and saw that Michael was already working in front of his desk. She thought that he was still sleeping at this time. Thump, thump. After she knocked on the door, she heard the deep and unique voice of Michael. "Come in." Chandler stepped in and put the thick budget case file in front of Michael. "President Guan, the budget case is completed." Michael reached out to flip through the budget case and then asked with doubts in his eyes, "Now I don't have time to review the accuracy of the budget case. If there is a mistake in the budget case after we have submitted this time, our reputation for being serious and rigorous for many years will be ruined. Do you understand?" "Wessie." Chandler immediately became nervous, but at this point, she had no return back. It seemed that she was going to make it or break it. "Brilliance Group is my source of income. I won't risk the reputation of Brilliance Group." Chandler straightened her back. Right after her graduation, she joined Brilliance Group. For 3 years, she had been working hard because the Brilliance Group had helped her to support her mother and sister financially. Her feelings for the Brilliance Group were beyond words. Michael took a deep look at Chandler. Then he got up and said, "I am going to copy the budget case file now. The bidding meeting will be held at 9 o'clock. We'll leave at 8:30. You should prepare in advance." Chandler couldn't help but frown, and she asked, "Am I going to the bidding meeting too?" This project was very important, and it had always been supervised by the president himself. How could she, a little assistant, be qualified to go to the bidding meeting? Seeing the confusion on Chandler's face, Michael patiently explained. "The budget case was remade by you. You will need to provide answers if some related questions are asked." "Okay." Chandler could only nod. Michael took a glance at Chandler. Then he turned around and left. Walking in the corridor, Chandler looked down at her wrinkled clothes and hurried back to the office. She grabbed her bag and ran out. She would go to the bidding meeting, and on top of that, she would go with the president. Not only would she embarrass herself with her sloppy look, but she would also embarrass the entire employees of Brilliance Group. As a consequence, the capitalist would definitely give her a hard time for that. She looked at the watch. There was still an hour and a half before 8 o'clock. She had to rush home and freshen up. It would be best if she could put on a light makeup and change into proper clothes. Chandler ran out of the office building hurriedly. She was waving at the roadside for over 10 minutes. Yet, she was not able to find a taxi. How can I have such a bad luck at this moment? But it is also easy to understand that since no one comes to work at this time, it is really not usual for a taxi driver to wait here for business. While Chandler was trying to figure out a way so hard, she suddenly saw Michael getting into that black Bentley in a hurry. Seeing this, Chandler had no time to think. She ran over and grabbed the door handle before Ford closed the door. Then, she squeezed out the most sincere smile to Michael, who was sitting in the car. "President Guan, where are you going? Can you give me a ride? Number." There was no expression on Michael's face, and he refused stiffly. After hearing this, Chandler cursed in her heart. "At the end of the day, I am still your employee. Why do you have to be so difficult to communicate?" However, Chandler continued to flatter him and said, "President Guan, look at my current status. I am unkept. If I go to the bidding meeting like this, not only will I embarrass the people of Brilliance Group, but I will also embarrass you. Where are you going?" At this time, Michael finally asked her. Chandler immediately felt hope and replied quickly, "I am going home to change my clothes." At this time, Michael said with a cold face, "There is a problem with the copy machine in the company, and I need to go to the printing store right now to print out the budget case." Chandler rolled her eyes and immediately said, "The printing store that the company has been using is on my way home. You can take me there. I won't waste your time." Hearing this, Michael became quiet. Chandler thought that he had agreed, so she immediately squeezed into the car. As Chandler squeezed into the car, she happened to touch the body of Michael. Chandler saw him move inside detestably and then reached out to dust off his clothes with contempt in his eyes. Seeing this scene, Chandler pursed her lips. She really wanted to go up and scold him. "Even though you are a boss and a rich man, is it really necessary to be this particular?" He acted as if she had a virus. Chandler looked at him fiercely. Of course, when he wasn't paying attention, she decided to put up with it after giving it some thought. After all, she needs that job. Originally, Chandler's house was not far from that printing store, and it was easier to call a taxi there. Although there was no plenty of time to make the round trip, she was able to arrive at the company at 8:30. However, for some reason that day the car was driving very slowly. The traffic in the front was very, very congested. Michael looked down at the watch on his wrist and anxiously asked Ford, who was driving in the front, "Why is the traffic so congested?" "President Guan, the navigation indicated that there was a car accident in front of us. I am afraid that the traffic will not be recovered for a while," Ford answered. Hearing this, Michael frowned. Chandler was stunned all of a sudden. Now what? She would definitely embarrass everyone if she went to the bidding like this. While Chandler was thinking about what to do, Michael suddenly said, "The printing store is right in the front. I'll run over there to make the file copy. There is a shop across the street. Go and buy some suitable clothes for yourself. Ford, make a U-turn and wait for us on the street." After saying that, Michael immediately got out of the car and left. Chandler was stunned for a moment, then immediately jumped out of the car and ran quickly to the store that Michael had mentioned. Chandler thought to herself while running, "No wonder he became the president. His ability of adaptation is far better than a small staff like me." Then she started to admire him a little bit. About an hour later, Chandler came back, as if she had been robbed. At this time, Michael was already waiting anxiously in front of the car. When he saw Chandler coming, he asked straight away, "I was just telling you to buy a professional suit. I was not asking you to go shopping. Do you realize it is 8 o'clock now?" Chandler looked up at the fierce Michael and was about to explode with anger. The store that he mentioned was a worldwide name brand. How could she afford a professional suit that cost almost $10,000? She could only ask the clerk to take out the clothes on sale, and it took some time. She had overspent several $1,000s on her credit card. She would have to eat instant noodles for 2 months from now on. Okay. Chandler wanted to throw up as soon as she thought of instant noodles. "I am sorry. However," Chandler said through gritted teeth in the end, because if she didn't apologize, she couldn't even pay off her credit card. If she lost her job, "Why didn't you put the new clothes on?" Michael suddenly looked at the bag in Chandler's hand and shouted, I was afraid that you had to wait." "So," Chandler answered with difficulty. Michael's face got darkened. After thinking for a while, he said, "We can't make it if we don't leave now. You go change in the car." After saying that, he turned around and went to sit in the passenger seat. Change in the car. Is he kidding? Both of them are grown-up guys. Okay, he wanted her to change clothes in front of them. Chandler really wanted to scold him. Is he trying to embarrass her? Besides, does he think that she was an easy woman? Chandler stood there for a few seconds, seeing that she was still not moving. He rolled down the window by the passenger's seat. Then, a cold and stiff face appeared. "What are you doing?" When he yelled like that, Chandler panicked, and she had no choice but to open the car door and get on the back seat. Then, Ford drove the car into the road rapidly. Chandler looked up at the two men in front of her with their backs facing her. When she was in a dilemma, the scene in front of her made her stunned. A barrier suddenly appeared in front of her and slowly fell down. In an instant, the car was separated into 2 parts. The front seat and the back seat of the car were separated. It was really poverty that limited Chandler's imagination. Out of expectation, the car actually had such a function. It seemed that Chandler had misunderstood Michael just now. Her face immediately flushed a bit, and then she seized every second to change her clothes. And she changed her clothes, straightened her hair, and put on a light makeup in the shortest period of time. As soon as Chandler finished dressing herself, the barrier in front of her slowly rose. And then she and the other 2 people in front of her once again were sharing the same space. When the car was driving fast, it was very quiet inside the car. There was only the sound of flipping papers. From time to time, Chandler raised her head and looked at Michael, who was in front of her. At this moment, he was focused on reading the budget case in his hand. "What are you looking at?" Michael, who was looking down at the budget case, suddenly asked without looking up. Chandler was startled. She patted herself on the chest and said flattery, "Oh, I am just worried about the budget case." "Don't worry. I have checked it roughly. There should be no problem." Michael suddenly closed the budget case. "Are you sure there is no problem by glancing through it?" Chandler raised her eyebrows and looked at him. It was not that long ago that he had just had the budget in his hands. Usually, it would take a day for ordinary people to read through it, let alone make sure there were no mistakes. At this time, Michael's driver plus special assistant Ford suddenly turned his head and said with a smile, "Miss Sue, you probably don't know yet, but President Guan graduated from the accounting department of Tsinghua University. He also has a master's degree from the accounting department of the University of Texas at Phillip. He passed the CPA test at the age of 25. When hearing Ford's words, she couldn't help looking at Michael with admiration. You passed the CPA test at 25 years old. Chandler had always thought that Michael was an ignorant and uneducated privileged second generation who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, that he had nothing but a pretty face. Chandler did not expect him to be a top student who graduated from Tsinghua University and with a master's degree from the accounting department of the University of Texas at Phillip, the best accounting department in the world. He passed the CPA test at 25 years old, which simply made him a young talent. Oh dear, passing the CPA test has always been Chandler's dream. It is a pity that several years after graduation, she only passed 2 courses. She set for herself a grand goal that she had to try her best to pass the CPA test before she turned 30. Michael glanced at Chandler's admiring eyes, and he pulled out a long face and said, "As long as you graduated from the accounting department and work hard enough, you can pass the CPA test even if you are ordinary in talent." His words made Chandler frown. What is that supposed to mean? Was he calling her stupid in a roundabout way? Chandler immediately took back her admiring look, and she looked straight ahead with a serious look. She thought to herself, what is so great about it? Maybe his parents pulled some strings for him to get to Tsinghua University, and that university in the United States. Even if the CPA test was strict, maybe he only passed it because he was lucky. It was completely silent in the car. Only then did Michael turn around and check out Chandler. Chandler had changed into a black professional dress with a white shirt inside. Her slightly curly hair was curled up behind her head, and she also wore a pair of golden earrings on her ears, which made her look graceful and professional. With the corner of her eye, she saw him checking her out. Chandler lowered her head and looked at herself, fearing that Michael would not be satisfied. After all, today's bidding would be a big occasion. Michael looked away and did not say anything. Only then did Chandler let out a sigh of relief. Her outfit should have been qualified today. "You didn't eat breakfast. Are you hungry?" Michael suddenly asked. After hearing this, Chandler was stunned. She thought to herself, she has been working all night long. How can she not be hungry now? But she still shook her head and faked a smile. "I am not hungry." But at this time, her stomach made some noise as a protest. At this moment, she was really embarrassed. She looked down at her stomach and cursed in her heart. "Can't you tolerate a bit longer? This is very embarrassing." When he heard the noise from her stomach, Michael twitched his mouth as if he was smiling faintly. If he took it as a smile, then Michael suddenly threw something at her. Chandler lowered her head and picked it up. It turned out to be a sushi bread. When she saw the sushi bread, Chandler felt that her saliva was about to drip down. She was too hungry. "There are still 5 minutes to go. You'd better finish eating quickly." Michael looked down at his watch and said, although his attitude was irritating, Chandler told herself, "I can't let my stomach suffer. I have to learn to lower my head under the roof of others." The next moment, Chandler tore open the wrapping paper, lowered her head, and started to devour in disregard of her image. Naturally, eating bread like this can make people choke. When she was halfway eating, Chandler touched her chest and felt that the bread was stuck there. She tried hard to swallow it down as she was rolling her eyes, but she couldn't swallow it. She couldn't even speak. When seeing this scene from the corner of his eye, Michael looked a little worried. Ford, the driver in front of him, happened to look back. Michael winked at him. Ford immediately took a bottle of water and handed it over. "Miss Sue, the water." Chandler quickly took the mineral water, unlocking it. She then raised her head and drank half a bottle. In the end, Chandler stroked her chest and thought to herself, "Fortunately, I didn't choke to death." The next moment, she looked up at Ford and thanked him sincerely. "Thank you." Michael took a glance at her from the corner of his eye, and he couldn't help smiling. But then immediately he pulled up his stiff face. Chandler glanced at Michael and then rolled her eyes at him. She cursed in her heart, "An evil capitalist. His heart is really black." When the staff was almost choked to death, he didn't even offer to help. It seems that after all, Ford, who was in the working class just like her, is trustworthy. The bidding this time attracted several powerful big companies in Zhangzhou city. The presidents from all these companies were listening to the final results in the conference room. Chandler was waiting on the benches in the corridor with the other senior executives from different companies. Just now, Chandler was called in to answer a few questions. She thought that her answer was not bad because she noticed that Michael's face was gentle. This pleasant-looking face actually gave her a lot of confidence, allowing her to answer the following questions smoothly. The clock in the corridor showing it was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But the bidding still hasn't ended. Chandler was very nervous. She was afraid that if they failed at the bidding, Michael, that temperamental and capricious guy, would vent his anger on her. And then she would really have to leave the company. A few minutes later, the door of the conference room opened, and people in suits and leather shoes came out all together. Michael was the last one to walk out. His face was cold, and his lips were tightly closed. Chandler's heart suddenly rose to her throat. She thought to herself, "It seems that we didn't make it in the bidding. For the time being, I'd better keep my head low and be more obedient. By no means should I provoke this big boss, or otherwise, it is not going to end well for me." President Guan. Chandler walked towards him and greeted him cautiously. "Let's go." Michael took a glance at her and turned to leave. Walking on her high heels, Chandler hurriedly followed behind him, not daring to breathe. There were a lot of people waiting for the elevator. Michael stood in the front, and Chandler stood behind him because she really didn't know what to say to comfort him. It was probably due to the boredom from waiting for the elevator. Michael suddenly turned to look at Chandler and asked, "Why don't you ask about the results of the bidding? So you don't care about Brilliance Group at all?" When hearing being asked this question out of the blue, Chandler really couldn't say anything. She was afraid that she would annoy him by asking him, and now she is being accused of not caring about the company by not asking who could she go to reason with. Chandler forced a smile. I was just going to ask, how is the result?" Despite she asked, she understood that even a fool would know that Brilliance Group had failed the bidding this time. But she somehow had to show her concern for the company in front of that capitalist. Michael took a glance at Chandler. "The Brilliance Group has won the bid." "What?" Chandler was stunned. "We won the bid." Why did he still act as if his father just died when it comes to a joyful thing like this? When seeing Chandler's expression, Michael frowned and stepped forward to stare at her. "Don't you want the Brilliance Group to win the bid?" "Yes. I pray every day at home for the Brilliance Group to prosper for thousands of years and to live forever for generations," Chandler said spontaneously. After saying that, she realized that she had used the wrong phrases. But it was too late. Chandler lowered her head as Michael was staring at her. Ever since she started to learn accounting, she had forgotten about her language skills completely. Ding! At this time, the elevator came. "President Guan, the elevator is here." Seeing the elevator coming to save her from the awkward situation, Chandler raised her head and tried to smile. Michael glanced at her and turned to get into the elevator. Chandler followed him closely and also got into the elevator. There were too many people in the elevator, to the point that even after the elevator door was closed, everyone had to hold their breath because everyone's body was almost sticking together. Chandler stood in a corner of the elevator, and the two men next to her had physical contact with her. It happened to be a warm spring day, and she had very thin clothes on. She got so awkward that she had to turn around and let her chest face against the elevator wall. She had been trying very hard to get close to the elevator wall, but the people behind her were still pushing toward her. She felt that her butt had already touched someone else's body. Just as Chandler was feeling awkward, she suddenly felt a body approaching her. She immediately sensed the masculine smell of a familiar man. Chandler looked back and saw a handsome face. It turned out that Michael had separated the two men using his own body, and his hands were also pressing the elevator wall in order to create a separate space for her. However, this posture was a little ambiguous. She was almost in his arms, and Chandler could almost hear his heartbeat. Such an intimate contact made Chandler blush, and then she did not dare to look at his eyes, so she quickly turned back and lowered her head. Damn it! Her heart was beating restlessly as if there were butterflies in her stomach. She put her hands on her chest, and she kept telling herself in her heart, "Chandler, why are you so useless? You are just very close to him. Is it really necessary for you to blush and for your heart to beat fast?"